So you're answering a question about analysing strategic alliances. As with any analysed question, you need to present two sides to the argument, so the pros and cons of this particular format of growth. When it comes to strategic alliances, you're most commonly going to be referring to them relative to something like a joint venture. So the answer of advantages and disadvantages here mirror quite closely features that distinguish those two types of business model. So some of the advantages you might have decided to include in your response could be, number one, that no new legal entity is created. So the businesses aren't coming together to form a new third-party business. This means there's less setup. It also means that the degree of buy-in from the businesses can be much more moderate. It can be a very small connection or a more significant connection based on what the businesses are looking for. Which also leads me to the next point, in that a strategic alliance can be just two businesses or it could be quite a few businesses. If we look at strategic alliances in airlines, we see that, for example, Star Alliance has multiple airlines all working together on that alliance scheme in terms of benefits to their members, code sharing their flights, etc. This provides a degree of flexibility and again comes back to that independence and the ability to decide how much you want to participate or engage in this process. Another option you might have chose to discuss is the fact that in a strategic alliance, both businesses still remain independent. So they're still independently functioning organizations, even with regards to the alliance. So while there will be agreed upon conditions, they're still operating as individual private entities and they can't control each other's behaviors beyond kind of the shared benefit. And the last thing you might have chosen to discuss is that they're flexible. Because their degree of involvement can vary, because there's less setup involved, they can be quite quick to set up, they're flexible to adapt, you can change the conditions easily, and this provides an opportunity for a business to grow in a temporary or more permanent fashion over a short or longer period of time and remove some of the risk factor that we see in other examples of growth, such as joint venture, or even further when we look at things like mergers. Having said this, all of those advantages can be flipped to be disadvantages. And this is probably an example of an analysed question where you might go, here is the advantage, however, here is the disadvantage, and back and forth, rather than providing a here are my advantages arguments followed by here are the disadvantages arguments. It's up to you still, but that format works quite well for this question. So when we think about them as disadvantages, because the organization's personal buy-in level to the alliance is quite low, they don't have as much vested interest in supporting each other in that alliance. So they're still competing effectively. They may still be seeking to take each other's customers. The degree of, I suppose, team nature is not there. The fact that it's so flexible also means that it may be at times unstable. They may be prone to change. Businesses may withdraw. Even though it's contractually kind of structured, those terms are often not as long term. And so the flexibility involved means that you also don't have the predictability that you might have something like a joint venture. Strategies change over time. So an organization might become involved in a strategic alliance and then want a different outcome from it, or want to be with different parties. Because more parties may be involved, you may not necessarily want to be working with all of the parties involved. And again, because you retain independence, you also have no control over their actions. So if you're dealing with a company like Innocent Drinks, for example, that has a focus on social responsibility and ethical behavior, you don't necessarily have control over whether the partners involved in that strategic alliance is perhaps behaving less ethically. But if something sort of blows up in their business, that is going to reflect on you. So it's not, you don't have the control, but you still suffer the consequences if there is a downside. There are a range of other specifics, and obviously if you're answering this question in relation to a specific case study, you need to connect whichever of those elements relate particularly to the business in your case study that you are looking at. So for every element that you identified, you should have provided an example straight from the case.